Hello everyone. So today we will discuss about the constructors. Constructors are the equally important as we seen about the class and object in the previous sessions. Constructors play an important role. Okay, if you want to understand class to understand about the class, we must have we must have the good understanding of the constructors. Only when we can able to understand what is the class, actually what's happening internally within the class. So for that, constructor plays an important role. So what is a constructor? So constructor is nothing but a special method. Constructor is not a class. Don't confuse by that, because constructor will having the same name as a method name. Constructor will be having the same name as a class name. Constructor will be having same name as class name, right? So you can see here constructor will be having the same name as the class name, but constructor is not a class. Constructor is a special method. Constructor is a method. You have to remember that, because the constructor will be within the class with the same name as the class name. By saying that, don't confuse that constructor is also a class. No, constructor is a method. So constructor is a method. Constructor is a special method. Why constructor is a special method? Okay, we will discuss it. Okay, so where do we mention the constructor? We declare the constructor in the class with the same name as the class name. First point. Second point, constructor is a method. Constructor is a special method. Okay, why the constructor is a special method? Is because the purpose of the constructor is to initialize the variables. Initialize the variables to the instance variable of the class. Means it is initializing the default values to the variables in a class. Okay, so we usually write in previous example we also write in the class, we are creating the class. In class we create a variables, integer, some rule number, string name. Why at that moment we are not assigning any values, right? But who is assigning the values over there? So there comes the constructor into the picture. While at the time of compilation, the default constructor come into the picture, and the default constructor initialize the default values to the instance variable. Okay, so what is the purpose of the constructor? The purpose of the constructor is to initialize the default values for the variable in a class. First point, purpose. In purpose, first point is that it is initializing the variables of a class. Okay, here you can see that initializing the variables. And second point is that constructor doesn't have any return point. There is no return values for the constructors. No return value. Why the constructor is a method? When there is a method, it must have a return value, right? We have seen before while working with the methods. Every method has a return value. But why constructor? Constructor is also a method. If constructor is a method, why the constructor doesn't have any return value? We cannot return the value from the constructor. So the answer for this question we already discussed. What is that? What I said before, constructor is a special method. What is the purpose of the constructor? The purpose is only to initialize the variables. Here we are not manipulating the things, we are not doing any operations. The constructor, what it is doing, it is initializing the values to the instance variable. When it is initializing the values to the variable, so return doesn't come into picture. We no need of return type. When we need a return type, when we are doing some operations, some manipulations, some calculations we are doing. So we have to return the value to the calling function. But constructor is a special method. Because of that, the working style of the constructor is different. So the purpose of the constructor is to assign the values for the default variable within the class. So it is not doing any manipulations, it is not doing any calculations. That's the reason the return type for the method is not required. Constructor is a very another point is constructor is very important for creating the instance of a class. Without constructor the class we can create the instance of the class, means we can create object of the classes over there, and constructor cannot be abstract. These are the properties we have to follow. The constructor cannot be abstract, cannot be final or the static. Why? If it is an abstract, if it's an abstract, then we cannot write anything over the constructor. We have to derive it. In the derived class we have to write, but constructor doesn't work like that. In the same class itself it has to assign the values. So we cannot keep the constructor as an abstract or the final or a static. And another one is that you can create the static constructor. But if you create the static constructor, it will initialize the values only for the static variables, not for the other variables. So static constructor only for the static class and the static variables. Okay. So constructors, 3 points you have to remember. Constructor is a special method. The purpose of the constructor is to initialize the values of within the class, and the constructor doesn't have any return type. Why constructor doesn't have any return type? Because the purpose of the constructor is to initialize the values, not to manipulate the return to the calling function. Okay, these are the 3 to 4 points we have to remember. These are the important qualities of the constructors. So there are types of constructor. What is that? Default constructor, parameterized constructor, copy constructor, private constructor, and the static constructor. Okay. Default constructor. Default constructor is, it means even if you are not mentioning it, we have declared the class. In the previous session we have seen that we have created the class, but we are not creating the constructor. But when we not creating the constructor, then who is creating the constructor for that? That compiler comes into a picture. Compiler says, okay, in this code we are unable to see the default constructor. So the compiler itself create a default constructor internally. It will create a default constructor internally, and it will keep on assigning the default values to the variables in the class. Okay, that is the default constructor, or the parameterized less constructor, means no parameters. Okay. And another one is a parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor is that if you want to assign the values before the compilation, if you want to assign the values, not the default values, means if you're not passing any values, means default value will be assigned. For integer, default value, integer is a integer I equal to 0, it will be assigned. Double and j equal to 0.0, it will get assigned. Okay, but I want to assign the value of I equal to some value 10, 20 something. So in that case I need to go for the parameterized constructor. Okay, so I need to use the predefined values to that variable. So in that case I need to go for the parameterized constructor. I need to, for the constructor I, for the constructor of the class, for the value I am passing some value from the main function. I will call, while creating an instance of that class, we need to pass and values to that variable. That is considered as a parameterized constructor. We will see all those examples. Just I am saying the overview. There's like an introductions. Okay. Yeah. Copy constructor. Copy constructor is that if you copy the same instance of the whatever the constructor the value is assigned, we can copy to it and we can use the same to the other object. We can assign for the other object also. Okay, so here we can see that this is an example. You can see that you can see for the default constructors. Default constructor. These constructors are injected into all the classes. Declaration that to not introduce of the other constructor. You can see here. This is the constructor, right? This is the class test. In the class we can have the same to the class name. So this is not the exact means see the class. Okay, it's about the property, but it's not the simplest example to think. We'll go with another example while doing the some small code in the Visual Studio. Okay. Yeah, here you can see that this is the you can see this, right? This is the class called as an widget. Okay. And here you can see this is a class name is widget. Again the same name we are using. This is a constructor. The same class name, with the same class name we are creating any method. That method is known as a constructor. And you can see this method is not a default constructor, it is a parameterized constructor. Why? Because we are passing in parameters here, right? From where we are passing the parameters? We are passing the parameters from while we are creating the instance object. Till now we are saying this is the same as the class name. No, here you can understand some little bit more now. Before we are saying that okay, how to create an object, like the class name, create a reference variable, new is a keyword, and again the class name. But here now we can say that this is an constructor. It is not a class name. After new keyword what we write, this is constructor. This is constructor now. Okay. Now if you want to say to explain about the how to create an instance of variable, class name, reference variable, new keyword followed by the constructor name. Constructor name is the same as the class name. That's the reason we think it's both as the class name. No, this is a class name, this is a reference variable, new keyword, and another one is a constructor name. Here the constructor is the parameterized constructor. So when we invoking the constructor, we have to pass the values. So here what will happen for the size? It is not going to assign the default values. It is going to assign the value 10. Right? Why it is going to assign the value 10? Because here we are passing the value of 10 when we are calling, and when second time we are calling, this will be assigned as an 20 because we are passing the values. For example, if we are not passing any values here, it is a default constructor, then the size will be initialized with the default value. What is the default value of the integer? 0. It will be assigned with the 0. Okay. This is about the default constructor and the parameterized constructors. Yeah, this is about the comes another important is about the base constructors. It's very important when we especially discuss about the deriving the class, deriving the constructor. Another is that chain of constructors. Another standard interview question is that chain constructor. They will ask how the chain of constructor is going to build. So this will be an useful topic to discuss. Yeah, here it is. This is what I am saying. Constructors chaining. Okay. This is about a copy constructor that will copy the constructors values. Okay. Yeah. All the 3 to 4 constructors are there: static constructor, private constructor, copy constructor, default, and parameters constructor. Let's now discuss all in the same session. Today we will see examples about the default constructor and parameterized constructor. Okay. In the next session we'll see about the copy constructor and the private constructor. Okay. Let's not confuse everything in the same session. It will be difficult to understand it. Okay. Just we'll go to the Visual Studio Editor and we'll see some examples how the constructor will behave. Okay. Then yesterday's program. Just copy this, keep this as. For this only we will do. Right. We'll create the fresh one. Get confused. It's a this is the every time the program has the main method, right? Yeah, so from there we have to initialize the constructor. So first we'll create the class. Click class and class name we can say that something student. Okay. Here we will see the integer rule number, right? I'm not going to other any values here. First we will see now we'll see that this we have to be in the method, right? Okay, so what I'm doing here I'm taking one property called the rule number, and for that rule number we are passing a value. Here I'm not passing a value. Next we will see what it is going to display here, and for this we create an instantiation of the class. Instantiation of the class is nothing but we are creating an object of the class, reference variable for that class. How to create the reference variable of the class? Class name, reference variable obj underscore student equal to new operator followed by constructor name. What is the constructor name? Constructor name is the same as the class name, but here you can say that there is no constructor here. We are not creating any constructor. If we are not creating any constructor, we are not creating any constructor, then by default compiler will create an default constructor and assign the default values to the variables of the class. Okay, here we are not creating any constructor, but if we are not creating, what will happen? Do we get any error? No. You can see here, are we getting any error? We are not getting any error. It compiled successfully, right? Just a minute. Yeah, here you can see we are not getting any error. Build success means there is no error, even though we are not created in the default constructor. We are not getting any error, means internally someone is creating a default constructor. That is nothing but compiler will see, it will think, okay, there is no default constructor here. So what it will do, compiler will create the default variable. Not only it will create the default default constructor, but also it will assign the default values to the class instance variables of the class. Okay, first we will see that. Take underscore student dot console.read key. Okay, just we'll give the debugger and you will see that. See, they came here value, and the what is the value here? 0. Why it's coming 0? Because the default value of the integer is 0. But who is assigning the 0? Who is assigning the value 0 for that? That is nothing but an default constructor. It is automatically creating by the compiler, right? Compile time, getting successful, no errors, the build is successful, right? Here we are creating the constructor. This is a class name, this is a reference variable, object you can say, new keyword and constructor name. But here in this class, do we create the constructor? Do we create the default constructor? No, we are not creating the default constructor here. Even though default constructor is not created, but we are what we are doing, we are using here as a default constructor by creating the class. When we are declaring the class, when we are using the constructor name here, but there is no default constructor, it has to give error, but it is not giving error. Why it is not giving error? Because at the time of compilation, okay, at the time of compilation, default constructor, compiler will create. Okay, if you are not creating any constructor, compiler will create default constructor. It will not only create the default constructor, but also it will assign the default values to the instance variable of the class. What is the integer default value? 0. Okay, we'll see here. Press F10, F11. We can see the value of the roll number is 0. Who is assigning the 0? We have not mentioned anything 0 for this roll number, right? We are not given anywhere 0 in our code. But it is showing that roll number is 0. Who is assigning 0 to that? Who is giving the instruction to that? So, default constructor. But we are not creating any default constructor here. If we not creating any constructor, then compiler will create default constructor and assign the default values to the variables of the class. So you can see here, that's the reason the default constructor is assigning 0. As we programming while doing the code, we are not mentioning anywhere the value of this rule number. Okay, so what is assigning? 0. You can see here and the output it is showing the roll number is 0. The roll number is of integer data type, so the default value of the integer is 0. Okay, we'll go for the string now. What it will show for the string? Okay, what it is showing for the name? Start. Okay, we are not assigning any values to that. It is 0, and for the name it is showing null. So the default value for the string is null, right? So you can come to a conclusion that what the constructor is doing, what the default constructor is doing, it is assigning the default values of that data type. Boolean is there, right? Boolean is fees paid. Okay, true or false, right? Is fees paid. So what it is going to assign for that? So the rule number will be 0, name is a null, and you can see here, right? Is fees paid. Okay, showing false means the default value for the boolean is false. So what is the default constructor is doing? It is assigning the default values of the instance variable of the class. Okay. Here we come to know that even though if you are not mentioning the constructor, compiler will create the default constructor and it will assign the default values to the variables of the class. Okay, I say now here, I will create the default constructor. How to create the default constructor? To create the default constructor, not only default constructor, even the parameters constructor, all the constructor, first rule is that the name of the constructor must be same as the class name. What is the class name? Student. Exam we created. So this is constructor now. This is constructor. Usually by seeing this we get confused, but the name is same, student and student. So we get confused what is this, class or a method. So constructor is nothing but a special method. It's a special method. And one more thing you can observe, when we use this pattern is open and close. For the class we don't use that open and close, right? When we are using this open and close parenthesis, it means that we will use this only for the method. So this indicates that constructor is a method, but it's not like a normal method. It's a special method. Why it's a special method? Because it doesn't have return type. No return type. Why no return type? Because purpose of the constructor, is to assign the default values of the class variables. Got it? So the purpose, the constructor purpose is only to assign the values, default values to the class variable. Here we are not doing any manipulations, calculations, all those things. Do the calculation and assign the value to the calling function, nothing like that. Here, at the time of compilation, it will be called directly. No one is calling. Do we are calling this method specifically? No, we are not calling this method. At the time of compiler, when you see the class, and if the same name, if any method is there, it will think it's a constructor and it will be initialized. It will be called directly by the compiler. Okay, so this is about the default constructor. Here I say that I will assign the values. I am not depending on the compiler default. I will create my own. Here I will assign the values. Here you can assign the default values if you want, or else if you want to give some predefined values for that is also we can give. Okay. is phase fail. Roll number will be considered as a 10. Okay. So we click the debugger here. We'll see how the things will flow. It's giving an error. We'll see. Okay, it's showing that inaccessible to the protection. It's a public now. So you got it why it was showing an error. The class is public. Here I not mentioned the access modifier, so it will think it has a private constructor. So what is happening? It cannot be accessible because you have not mentioned the access specifier. So you can see this is the constructor, because when I create the constructor, if any error is in this constructor, we are getting warning not in the class, in the place of constructor, right? So it's saying that it's inaccessible due to its protection level. Okay, means it cannot access this because we are not made this constructor as a public. So we have to provide the access modifier, even because the class is also public, right? You can see now. No, where they call? As soon as you compile, directly call for the constructor. Means the default constructor is going to execute the first at the time of compilation. So at the time of compilation, it is assigning the values for the variables, class variables, whatever we mentioned in the constructor. Then it is going to execute the method, and here you can see the values. Now we are not getting default values. We are getting the values whatever we assigned in the default constructor. It is custom constructor. We are creating our own custom constructor, right? Here it is assigning the values. This is about the constructors, right? This is about the default constructor. Here you can say that how the things will work. First you see this topic. Here this is, you can consider the first is going to work. For example, for just a minute, how the things will interact and how you can go for the simple way of explain the things is that this has a 1, this is the first which is going to get into the picture. The first green, whatever we have marked in the green color, is that student and the reference variable. This is the first which is going to execute. Okay. And second is that new variable. Oh, that will mark it. It will be easy. Just a minute. Because this understanding is very important part again. So the first is what going to happen. Here you can see that the above statement is executing in the fourth step. The first step is that creating object as part of memory. Sorry, the creating the reference variable here, not object. Reference variable. First step of happening. In the first step, it is creating a reference variable. In the second step, creating object as part of this memory is allocated. Third is what happening, invoking. It is invoking here. Invoking the constructor and here it is initializing the default values. Where it is initializing the default values in the point 3. Whenever it hits the new keyword, when it sees the new keyword, at that time default constructor will be initialized and the default values is going to initialize for the instance variable. What is instance variable and the local variable we have discussed in the previous sessions. So the what are the variables are within the class outside the methods, those are known as an instance variable. The variables within the class and within the method, those variables are known as an local variables. It will initialize. And the fourth one, where it comes constructor. What is the last part here? This is the constructor part, right? What is the part of the constructor? What is the purpose of the constructor? Assigning the object address into reference variable. Okay. About the, you can say some small explanation about the how the things will flow internally. First, it will create the reference variable. Second one, the object has a memories allocated for the instance variable. And the third, when it will and as a third point, when it will execute it. So the naming is got a bit confused. This is fourth. This has to be second. First, what will happen? First, it will create the reference variable. After creating the reference variable, the compiler internally will hit for a new keyword. Whenever it will hit the new keyword, what is going to happen? The memory is allocated to the instance variable. And the third constructor will come into the picture. Whenever the new keyword, after hitting the new keyword, instance variable are created for those instance variable. The part third is constructor. So constructor will get invoked. It will execute the constructor. As a part of the constructor purpose is to initialize the default values, right, to the instance variable. This process will be done at the point 3 when the constructor comes into the picture. And the fourth one is that equal to operator. Equal to operator, what it will do? It will assign the object address to the reference variable. What is the reference variable? This is the reference variable. For this, it will assign the address where this class memory is created. Where this memory is created, that memory address will be assigned by the equal to operator at the last. Okay. Yeah, this is about the flow of the things. What the things is flowing internally. Again, we come to here. So now we have worked clear, right? What this actually mean now. Here it's working as a 4 points. First point is that reference variable. Second point is a new operator. Third is a constructor. Fourth is equal to operator. Equal to operator, it will assign the address for the reference variable, address of class memory where the class is created. That address will be assigned by the equal to operator at the last of this point. Okay. So this we have seen about the default constructor and custom the creation of the default constructor. Okay, then we'll wind up here today, and tomorrow we'll see about the parameter constructor, copy constructor, and the private constructor. 3 things we'll try to cover. What values to be assigned? I have some values. Yeah. So the parameter constructor and copy constructor we will see tomorrow. Okay guys, thank you.